The Interstellar Academy of Soar Prime stood as a gleaming monument to cooperation, progress, and the ideals of the Galactic Coalition. It was an impressive institution, a hub of knowledge that extended its reach to nearly every sentient species known in the galaxy. Students from thousands of light years away gathered here to learn, interact, and shape the future of their worlds. In this vast, bustling academic environment, one student stood out more than any other Cathra of the Thranis. The Thranis were known throughout the galaxy as a warrior race, fiercely protective of their traditions, but also possessing a beauty that was unparalleled. Their warriors had the lithe grace of predators, coupled with a deeply ingrained sense of pride in their heritage. Cathra embodied all of this and more. Her violet skin shimmered faintly in the low lights of the academy corridors, and her silver hair, always immaculately arranged, cascaded down her back like liquid metal. She had the build of a warrior, but moved with an ethereal elegance that made heads turn wherever she went. She was unattainable, or so everyone thought. At the academy, Cathra had earned a reputation that quickly placed her above the rest of her peers. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also brilliant, excelling in advanced xenobiology and interstellar diplomacy. Few could match her intellect, and even fewer dared to approach her. The Thranis, with their rigid societal structure, were selective in whom they allowed into their personal lives, and their disdain for weakness was well known. Other students whispered that any suitor who dared to make an attempt at Cathra would be met with cold rejection at best or humiliating dismissal at worst. But there was more to it than that. Cathra's isolation wasn't just a product of her race's reputation. She carried herself with an air of superiority, often keeping others at arm's length. She would speak to her fellow students in class, but the conversations were clinical, professional. Outside the academic environment, she seemed to drift away, becoming almost unreachable. No one, not even her own species, had tried to engage her in anything more personal, until Nathan Cade arrived. Nathan was a human, a species that had only recently gained formal membership in the Galactic Coalition. To the more established species, humans were something of a curiosity, newcomers to the interstellar stage, with a brash, unpredictable nature that often led them into situations they weren't fully prepared for. But humans also had a unique trait that intrigued many. They were bold, often ignoring the complex social hierarchies and traditions that other species adhered to with religious fervor. They operated on instinct, emotion, and a sense of adventure that other species found difficult to understand. Nathan embodied all of that. He was unremarkable in terms of appearance, a tall, lean young man with sandy brown hair and sharp green eyes. He was no warrior, nor was he a prodigy in any of the advanced sciences taught at the academy. He was an engineering student, here on an exchange program, fascinated by alien technology and determined to prove that humanity could hold its own on the galactic stage. When he first laid eyes on Cathra, like everyone else, he was struck by her beauty. But as the weeks passed, Nathan began to notice something others seemed to overlook. Beneath the cool, detached exterior she presented to the world, there was a hint of loneliness in Cathra's gaze. She would sit alone during mealtimes, always maintaining perfect posture, always keeping her gaze fixed on the horizon or the screens of her datapad. Even in group projects, she spoke little beyond what was necessary. "She's lonely," Nathan muttered to himself one evening, as he watched her from across the courtyard, where students gathered to relax after classes. His friends, all fellow students from Earth, laughed at the idea. "Lonely? No way, Mark," one of Nathan's closest friends, said with a scoff. "That's Cathra of the Thranis. She could have anyone she wanted. She's untouchable, man." "Rachel," another human student added. "People like us? We don't even register on her radar." Nathan didn't argue. Maybe his friends were right. But that night, as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his dorm, he couldn't shake the feeling that Cathra's isolation wasn't by choice. Maybe it was her culture, or maybe she had erected walls to protect herself. But whatever the reason, Nathan found himself wanting to know more about her more than what the Academy's gossip circles had to say. The next day, during a xenobiology class, Nathan found himself seated just a few rows behind Cathra. The class was studying the cellular structures of a species from a planet in the Trigelian system, a species known for its regenerative abilities. The professor, a Zethari with a booming voice, was explaining the intricacies of their DNA when Nathan's attention drifted to Cathra. She sat perfectly still, her datapad in front of her, her eyes focused intently on the holographic display floating above the professor's podium. Nathan's gaze traced the curve of her jawline, the delicate arch of her brow, and the faint shimmer of her skin under the overhead lights. It was easy to see why everyone was intimidated by her, but Nathan wasn't. As class ended and students began to file out, Nathan stood up and, without a second thought, walked toward Cathra. His heart pounded in his chest, a nervous energy coursing through him. He wasn't sure what he was going to say. He hadn't planned anything. All he knew was that he wanted to speak to her, to break through that icy exterior. Cathra, unaware of his approach, gathered her things with the same meticulous precision she applied to everything. She was about to stand when Nathan stepped into her path, his shadow falling across her. "Cathra, right?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rapid thudding of his heart. She blinked, surprised, and looked up at him. For a moment, there was silence between them. Her iridescent eyes studied him, as if trying to determine his intentions. "Human," she said, her voice smooth and slightly musical, but there was a note of caution in it. "Nathan Cade." Nathan was taken aback that she knew his name, but he pushed forward. "Yeah, that's me. I, just wanted to ask, do you want to grab a meal sometime?" Cathra's eyes widened, a reaction so subtle that most would have missed it, but Nathan saw it. Her entire posture shifted, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. In the split second before she responded, he could see the calculations running through her mind, her confusion, her disbelief. "You are asking me to share a meal?" she asked, her tone laced with incredulity. No one had ever dared to approach her like this, and certainly not a human. Nathan nodded, a nervous smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, just thought it'd be nice. No pressure." For a moment, Cathra said nothing. She simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. The air between them seemed to freeze, and Nathan half expected her to laugh or dismiss him outright. But then, to his astonishment, Cathra gave a single, slow nod. "Very well. I accept." Chapter 2. An Unexpected Invitation. Nathan couldn't believe it. Cathra, the most untouchable student at the academy, had just agreed to have a meal with him. As she nodded and collected her things, he struggled to keep his composure, unsure whether to attribute this moment to bravery or sheer luck. He stood frozen for a second, realizing the enormity of what had just happened. "Very well, human," Cathra said, rising from her seat with her usual grace. "Tomorrow evening, after the lecture on quantum biosystems, I will meet you at the common dining hall." Her voice was calm, composed, as if she had made a simple agreement. Nathan blinked, still somewhat in shock, and nodded quickly. Sure. Yeah, that works." With that, Cathra walked past him, her silver hair trailing behind her like a comet's tail. The other students in the class who had overheard the conversation gawked openly at Nathan. Whispers followed him out of the lecture hall, the murmurs a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You've got to be kidding me." Rachel practically tackled Nathan as he left the building, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Did Cathra just agree to go on a date with you? Like a real one?" Nathan raised his hands defensively. "I'm not sure it's a date. It's just a meal, you know?" Mark smirked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Man, whatever you did, it worked. You're probably the first person in the galaxy to get close to her without getting vaporized." Rachel elbowed him playfully. "Yeah, well, don't get your hopes up. Thranis don't date outside their species, especially not humans." Nathan shrugged. "I guess I'll find out tomorrow." That night, Nathan tossed and turned in his bunk, trying to figure out how the next day was going to play out. It was just a meal, right? But the way everyone reacted made it feel like something more significant. His mind kept flashing to Cathra's expression, one that wasn't disdainful or dismissive, but something else entirely, almost curious. The next day, as the quantum biosystems lecture ended, Nathan made his way to the dining hall, his heart thudding in his chest. He had never been this nervous about a meal in his life. What did Thranis even eat? Was there some sort of etiquette he needed to follow? His mind raced as he entered the hall. There, sitting by one of the windows that overlooked the academy's sprawling cityscape, was Cathra. She was dressed in her academy uniform, the dark fabric contrasting beautifully with her violet skin. Nathan swallowed hard and approached the table, trying to appear calm and collected. Cathra looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. "Nathan Cade." "Cathra," he replied with a slight nod. "Thanks for agreeing to this." Cathra inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, but her eyes never left his. I must admit, your approach was unexpected. Nathan chuckled nervously as he sat across from her. Yeah, I get that a lot. Humans don't really follow the same social rules, I guess. She studied him for a moment before speaking. Your species' reputation for brashness precedes you. Most would consider your actions bold, even foolish. Yet, you appear undeterred. Nathan smiled, his nerves settling a bit. Bold and foolish? I'll take it. But honestly, I just figured it couldn't hurt to ask. You seemed like you could use some company. Cathra tilted her head slightly, her silver hair catching the light. You assume I am in need of company? Nathan hesitated. Well, not exactly. I just noticed that, despite all the people around you, you're often alone. There was a pause. Cathra's eyes narrowed slightly, but not in anger, more in contemplation. That is an astute observation. I find most beings here. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Distracting. Nathan laughed softly. Yeah, I get that too. But sometimes being around people who are different can be refreshing, right? They might surprise you. Cathra raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting that you, a human, could surprise me? Nathan leaned back in his chair, grinning. I guess we'll see. The meal proceeded in relative calm. Nathan ordered a plate of nutrient packs and meat skewers, while Cathra chose a more exotic dish, some kind of floating cubes of protein suspended in a translucent broth that seemed to shimmer in the light. She ate with the precision of someone trained in etiquette, while Nathan casually took bites, doing his best to maintain a sense of decorum. As they ate, the conversation turned to lighter topics: academics, the recent influx of new students, and even the occasional mishap in the lab. To Nathan's surprise, Cathra was not only intelligent, but had a dry sense of humor, which she wielded with precision. Every now and then, a faint smile would cross her lips, and Nathan felt like he was slowly cracking through that icy exterior. When the meal was done, Cathra sat back, looking contemplative. I must admit, Nathan Cade, your company has been tolerable, perhaps even enjoyable. Nathan laughed, but he could tell that, for her, this was high praise. I'll take that as a compliment. Cathra's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer. I have not interacted with humans much. Your species intrigues me. You are not bound by the same rules that govern others. It makes you unpredictable. Nathan shrugged. Unpredictable can be fun. Cathra's eyes softened. Just for a moment. Perhaps. The sun had long set by the time they exited the dining hall. Nathan was still processing the fact that he had just shared a meal with Cathra, and it hadn't ended in disaster. As they walked through the academy grounds, Cathra turned to him. Tell me, Nathan Cade, do humans often ask those they barely know to share a meal? Nathan grinned. Not all of us, but I guess I'm not your typical human. Cathra's expression softened slightly. Indeed. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the stars above casting their soft glow across the academy's spires. Then, Cathra did something unexpected. She extended her hand, a formal gesture in Thranis culture. Nathan, though unfamiliar with the tradition, took it without hesitation. You are different, human, she said quietly. Perhaps we will dine again. Nathan smiled, shaking her hand gently. I'd like that. As Cathra turned and walked away, her figure fading into the night, Nathan stood there, wondering how this simple act of bravery had led him here. The galaxy was full of surprises, and perhaps none more surprising than the connection he had just begun to forge with the unattainable Cathra. Chapter 3. Whispers and Consequences. The days following Nathan's unexpected dinner with Cathra were anything but quiet. Whispers spread like wildfire across the academy, carried by students from all corners of the galaxy. It was as if the entire academy had collectively held its breath, waiting for the fallout of this most unlikely pairing. Did you hear? The human actually took Cathra out for dinner. I heard she didn't even reject him. What does that mean? Maybe it's a Thranis thing? Maybe they don't actually see humans as unworthy? The rumors varied wildly, but one thing was clear. Everyone was talking about Nathan Cade. He became an odd mix of legend and curiosity, and though he was used to blending in, the attention now followed him everywhere he went. Nathan tried to keep his head down. After all, it had only been one meal. Sure, he enjoyed Cathra's company, but he wasn't under any illusions about how different they were. Still, the academy wasn't going to let this go. As Nathan walked through the halls, he noticed the stairs, the sideways glances. Some of his classmates gave him nods of approval, while others smirked in disbelief. There were even whispers in the dining halls that Cathra herself had been seen inquiring about human culture and traditions, something that hadn't been heard of before. Nathan was sitting in one of the academy's shared lounges a few days later, going over his notes for an upcoming engineering exam, when Mark and Rachel approached him with mischievous grins. "So," Mark began, plopping down beside Nathan, "you've officially become a legend. The human who dared ask out Cathra. You know, I'm starting to think you might be the bravest person here." Rachel laughed, taking a seat on the arm of the sofa. "Or the craziest. People are still waiting for her to turn you down in some dramatic Thranis ritual." Nathan rolled his eyes but couldn't help but grin. "Guys, it's not that big of a deal. It was one dinner. She was just being polite." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Polite? Since when do Thranis do anything just to be polite?" Mark chimed in, his grin widening. "Yeah, they're not exactly known for their hospitality. And, word is, you've got the entire warrior class wondering what you did to impress her." Nathan shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just asked her to dinner. I guess she was curious, that's all." Rachel crossed her arms. "Well, whatever you did, you've certainly got the academy buzzing." Nathan sighed, knowing they wouldn't drop the subject. "Look, I'm just trying to survive my classes here. Whatever happens with Cathra, I'll figure it out as I go." But Nathan wasn't the only one feeling the weight of the academy's attention. Cathra, too, had found herself at the center of an unexpected storm. In Thranis culture, interactions with other species were often formal and strictly professional. The idea of forming any personal connection with a non-Thranis, let alone a human, was practically unheard of. And yet, Cathra had accepted Nathan's invitation. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, it was a simple meal. But now, she could feel the eyes of her peers watching her more closely than ever. Her Thranis classmates, in particular, had become unusually distant. She had always been respected, admired even, but now there was a subtle shift. Conversations became stilted, and there were moments when her fellow students would exchange glances when she entered the room. One evening, while Cathra was studying in the academy's library, a group of Thranis warriors approached her. They were fellow students, but their presence carried an air of confrontation. Their leader, a tall and imposing Thranis named Karel, stepped forward, his arms crossed. "Cathra," Karel began, his tone laced with disapproval, "there are concerns." Cathra raised her eyes from her datapad and met his gaze coolly. "Concerns? About what?" Karel's eyes narrowed. "About your recent associations, specifically with the human." Cathra kept her expression neutral, though a flicker of irritation sparked within her. "Nathan Cade is a fellow student. Our interaction was academic." Karel's lip curled slightly. "Academic? Word has spread, Cathra. The academy is abuzz with tales of your shared meal. The Thranis cannot afford to be seen associating too closely with weaker species." Cathra's eyes flashed with anger, though her tone remained calm. "Nathan is not weak. He is unconventional, yes, but I find that refreshing." Karel scoffed. "You are above such dalliances. Our people have always upheld a standard of excellence, and humans dash." Cathra stood abruptly, her posture rigid with authority. "Enough. I will decide who is worthy of my company, not you, Karel." There was a tense silence as Karel and his group exchanged uneasy glances. Cathra's reputation carried weight, even among her own people. Though Karel seemed ready to argue further, he ultimately relented, giving a stiff nod before turning away. As they left, Cathra felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She hadn't realized how much pressure had been building around her ever since that fateful meal with Nathan. But now, more than ever, she was determined to forge her own path. Meanwhile, Nathan was oblivious to the political undercurrents his actions had stirred. The next day, as he made his way through the academy's corridors, he found himself cornered by a group of students he didn't recognize. They weren't Thranis, but they carried themselves with the same kind of arrogance. The tallest among them, a reptilian alien with sharp teeth and scales glistening under the corridor lights, stepped forward, blocking Nathan's path. "So, you're the human who thinks he's worthy of Cathra, huh?" The alien sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Nathan blinked, taken aback. "Worthy? I just asked her to dinner. What's your problem?" The alien laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You don't get it, do you? Cathra isn't someone you can just ask out. She's out of your league, human. You don't belong in the same space as her. Nathan's jaw clenched. Who are you to decide that? The reptilian alien leaned in closer, his sharp teeth flashing. Someone who knows their place in the galaxy. You, on the other hand, are just a little earthling who's gotten too bold for his own good. Nathan's fists tightened, but he kept his cool. I think that's for Cathra to decide, not you. Before the situation could escalate, a familiar voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Cathra appeared at the end of the corridor, her violet eyes sharp and commanding. The reptilian alien stiffened, clearly intimidated by her presence. Without another word, he stepped back and slithered away, his cronies following in tow. Cathra approached Nathan, her expression unreadable. Are you all right? Nathan exhaled, nodding. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks. Cathra's eyes softened, just for a moment. It seems my association with you has caused some unrest. Nathan scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. Yeah, I've noticed. I didn't mean to stir up trouble. Cathra tilted her head slightly, her gaze fixed on him. You didn't. They simply fail to understand what I see. Nathan raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Cathra's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. That humans are far more interesting than I initially thought. Chapter 4. Breaking Barriers. In the weeks that followed, Nathan and Cathra's relationship continued to evolve, much to the shock of the Academy. They shared more meals, studied together in the vast libraries of Soar Prime, and engaged in debates that covered everything from interstellar politics to the ethics of artificial intelligence. As the tension around them grew, so too did their understanding of each other. Despite the mounting pressure from her peers, Cathra found herself drawn to Nathan's straightforward nature. Humans had a unique quality that her own kind lacked: a willingness to challenge the unknown without fear of failure or rejection. With Nathan, she didn't have to maintain the perfect Thranis facade. She could just be herself. However, not everyone was pleased with this growing friendship. The Academy, an institution built on cooperation between species, suddenly found itself teetering on the edge of an ideological battle. The Thranis students, in particular, had become increasingly vocal about what they saw as Cathra's betrayal of her people's values. One evening, as the Academy prepared for its annual interspecies diplomacy gala, Nathan found himself standing in front of the dormitory mirror, adjusting the formal attire he had rented for the event. It was a far cry from his usual casual clothes, and he felt awkward in the stiff, high-collared suit. Why am I doing this again? He muttered to himself as he fiddled with the buttons. You look ridiculous, Rachel teased from the doorway, leaning against the frame with a grin. She had stopped by to check on him before heading to the gala herself. Nathan groaned. Yeah, I feel ridiculous. Why did I agree to go to this thing? Rachel's grin widened. Oh, I don't know. Maybe because a certain Thranis beauty asked you to be her guest? Nathan flushed. It's not like that. We're just friends? Rachel cut him off with a laugh. Nathan, I've seen the way you look at her, and more importantly, the way she looks at you. I don't think it's just friends anymore. Nathan's blush deepened, but before he could respond, his datapad beeped. It was a message from Cathra. Meet me outside the Grand Hall at dusk. I have something to discuss with you. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He nodded at Rachel, who gave him a knowing look before heading off to the gala. Taking a deep breath, Nathan made his way to the Grand Hall. When he arrived, the sky above Soar Prime was a brilliant mix of colors as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Academy's gleaming towers. Cathra stood at the entrance to the Grand Hall, dressed in her people's traditional attire, a flowing silver gown that shimmered like the stars, adorned with intricate designs that symbolized her warrior lineage. She was breathtaking, and for a moment, Nathan forgot how to speak. Cathra, he managed, stepping forward. You look incredible. Cathra regarded him with her usual calm expression, though there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Thank you, Nathan Cade. You look quite acceptable yourself. Nathan chuckled, nervously running a hand through his hair. I'll take that as a compliment. Cathra glanced around, ensuring they were alone before speaking in a lower tone. I brought you here before the gala because I needed to speak with you privately. There are complications. Nathan's brow furrowed in concern. Complications? What's going on? Cathra folded her hands in front of her, her gaze steady but serious. There has been unrest among my people. Many do not approve of my relationship with you. They see it as a weakening of Thranis values, a betrayal of our traditions. Karel and others like him have been stirring dissent. Nathan's heart sank. He had known that their interactions would raise eyebrows, but he hadn't realized just how deeply it affected Cathra and her standing among her peers. I didn't mean to cause trouble for you. If you want to dash. Cathra silenced him with a raised hand. Nathan, I make my own decisions, and I have decided that you are worth knowing. There was a sincerity in her voice that made Nathan pause. His chest tightened, and before he could stop himself, he reached for her hand. Cathra, I don't want you to lose anything because of me. Her violet eyes met his, and for the first time, Nathan saw something in them that he had never seen before: vulnerability. I will not lose anything, she said firmly, but we must face the consequences of our connection. Tonight, at the gala, there will be those who will challenge us. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Challenge us? What do you mean? Cathra's expression hardened slightly. Karel has issued a formal combat challenge. In Thranis culture, it is a way to settle disputes of honor. He believes that by defeating me, he will demonstrate that my association with a human has weakened me. If I accept, the challenge must be fought to the end. Nathan's eyes widened. You're not seriously considering it, are you? This is insane. Cathra stepped closer, her voice low and serious. It is my duty to protect my honor and the honor of my people, but I do not fight without cause. If I accept, it is not only to defend myself, it is to prove that I stand by my decisions. Nathan's mind raced. What if? What if there's another way? Cathra tilted her head. What do you propose? Nathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. In human culture, we don't settle everything with combat. Sometimes, we use words. Maybe we can talk to him. Show him that what we have isn't a threat to Thranis values. Maybe we can change his mind. Cathra's gaze softened as she looked at Nathan, her eyes searching his. For a moment, she said nothing, then finally, she gave a small nod. Perhaps you were right, Nathan Cade. There is more than one way to fight. That night, at the gala, tensions ran high as the gathered students watched Cathra and Nathan enter together. Karel, standing with his group of Thranis warriors, glared at them with open hostility. Nathan, his heart pounding, approached Karel alongside Cathra. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him as he stood before the towering Thranis warrior. Karel, Nathan began, his voice steady. I know you see me as an outsider, someone who doesn't belong in your world, but I'm not here to challenge your traditions. I'm here because I respect Cathra and I respect her choices. Karel's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Cathra stepped forward. Karel, you claim that my association with Nathan has weakened me, but I tell you this, strength does not come from isolation. It comes from understanding, from connection. Nathan has shown me that humans are not to be underestimated. The room fell silent as Cathra's words hung in the air. For a long moment, Karel said nothing, his gaze shifting between Nathan and Cathra. Then, slowly, he lowered his arms. I may not agree with your choices, Cathra, Karel said, his voice grudging but respectful, but I cannot deny your strength. You have made your decision, and I will respect it. With that, Karel turned and walked away, leaving Nathan and Cathra standing in the center of the grand hall. Nathan exhaled, relief flooding through him. He turned to Cathra, who gave him a small, approving smile. You were right, she said softly. Sometimes words are the strongest weapon. Nathan grinned. Glad I could help. As the night continued and the tension in the room eased, Nathan realized that, while their journey was far from over, they had taken the first step towards something deeper. Cathra wasn't just an unattainable figure anymore, she was someone he had come to care about. And perhaps she felt the same.